Hello and welcome to Roportaj. I'm Danish bin Nabi. I shall today have a discussion on the book Messiah Modi, A Tale of Great Expectations by Taveleen Singh. The book has been published by HarperCollins. Before 2014 and after 2014, you have been a vocal supporter of Mr. Prime Minister. But what has changed now? Why Messiah Modi now? With an question mark to the book title.
My faith in Mr. Modi before 2014 was that he seemed to represent a kind of politician who would take India in a new economic direction. And to some extent, he did things like Swachh Bharat and cleaning up our cities, making sure that we deal with garbage, making, this Beti Bachao, even if they're just slogans. They are the right slogans. I believe that the Congress Party failed India in not giving people the tools of development, which are education and healthcare and all of those things. Because if you give people that, they can lift themselves out of poverty. Now, I thought that Mr. Modi would concentrate on these things, which is why I supported him right up to demonetization. Demonetization. When he did this crazy thing, which the whole world recognized as insanity. Only one other country, I think, has ever risked canceling 90% of its currency, and that was Venezuela. And we know what Venezuela looks like. So that's when I began to be worried about his economic ideas. And then I found that instead of actually, I believe in free markets. I believe in an open, liberal economy. I believe that the recipe for success for any country is a combination of a free economy and democratic rights, right? So I actually first got disappointed when I realized that he was as much of a socialist, a statist. He wanted control of the economy. He wanted to take full charge instead of doing the things that I had hoped that he would do. That was my first moment of disappointment.
Ma'am, there is a common perception about Mr. Prime Minister that he does not consult or listen to anyone. How bad is such a trend for working democracy?
It is very bad because actually in a democratic country, the man who leads that country must be open to criticism and dissidence. He has to accept that that is the meaning of democracy, is that the people, Jan Aadhar, the word Jan Aadhar means the people have given you the mandate. So if you cannot take criticism even from journalists whose job it is to actually be watchdogs, then that is a very bad trait. And I think that he damaged himself very seriously by not accepting criticism.
Ma'am, the entire PMO has been curtailed for the journalists and only few are allowed in. How do you view such a development?
It is a very bad idea, and especially for the Prime Minister himself. Because you see what they've done, as you probably know well, the media has been controlled in different ways. This is not the first time it's been controlled, but at no time in my long career as a journalist have I seen as much self-censorship as I see now in the media. So what happens is the Prime Minister then is listening only to his own, to his chamchas, to the people who say the things he wants to hear. So when somebody criticizes him in a foreign magazine, this huge halla starts, ye hamare khilaf hai, ye India ke khilaf hai. It's not true. If the Economist criticizes the Prime Minister, it's because that's what the people do in other countries. That's what journalism is about.
And such a journalism has stopped in India.
There's very little criticism of the Prime Minister. And when it is cushioned as much as possible because the Prime Minister does not like criticism.
Ma'am, lynching of Muslims, Dalits, was the last time you put your foot forward and said enough is enough. But Mr. Prime Minister has not even spoken once about lynchings. Has Mr. Prime Minister morally failed its people?
I wouldn't call it so much a moral failure of the people as a dangerous tendency to believe that it's all right to think of a very large minority community consisting of 200 million people as targets. And we've seen this endless targeting, which is very, very dangerous in my view. And this is not a view I have now. In secular times, when the Sikhs were killed, I spoke up very strongly against what happened. And when there were riots like in Meerut and in Bhagalpur and Hashimpura, I did then, right? But those were episodic incidents. When you create an atmosphere in which people or certain Hindu groups feel that Muslims can be targeted, that I believe is dangerous for India, for India's future.
And then what laws like CAA and NRC?
I've opposed those with with every breath in my body.
You have termed them. You have also termed them as Nuremberg laws.
I have, because the Nuremberg laws, as you know well, were meant to target the Jewish community. Now, when you say, and you say it very clearly in the law, that refugees from who are religiously persecuted can come in as long as they are not Muslims. What do you do now when in Afghanistan, which has been our friend, there are now Muslim refugees who are looking desperately for somewhere to go? So when you make a discriminatory law, which this is, I believe that I put it in the category of a Nuremberg law.
Ma'am, your book is laced with many stories. One of the stories of Golu Bhaiya, who actually is Himanshu Tripathi from Banaras. You have again given a brief description about Banaras, how the old traditional actual city was. But then again, Modi built that, Mr. Prime Minister built that corridor, which Indira Gandhi had refused by saying that I cannot destroy the holy city of Banaras. Can you kindly talk a bit about those incidents?
I have known the Tripathi family since the time of Golu Bhaiya's grandfather. And they used to live, all the Mahants of the Vishwanath temple lived around the temple. They lived in very old houses around the temple, which have been destroyed. To build this corridor from the Ganga up to the temple, which in my view is an unnecessary construction in a very old city. All you needed to do in Banaras was to clean it up, was to clean the filth and to clean the Ganga. And so again, once more, I'm disappointed in what the Prime Minister did there.
In one of the interviews, I was checking one of your interviews, you said that killings, the lynchings, riots between Hindus and Muslims have taken place previously in previous governments as well. But then during the secular time, the secular governments, so-called secular governments, they do not have the killing DNA inside them, but it's completely different with RSS and the present BJP. Can you kindly talk a bit about it? What this killing of DNA is?
Okay, I actually believe that the RSS or anybody who trains in the RSS schools or shakhas or the pathshalas are taught that the Muslims are the enemy, that that we've got to think of the Muslims, of the Muslim community as a whole, as the enemy. Now, I have also written very strongly against jihadi Islam, which I believe is going to ruin wherever it goes, which country it goes to. But you cannot say then that every Muslim is a jihadi. But I believe that the RSS trained Hindu believes this or would like to believe it. It's part of his agenda.
Ma'am, you have talked about demonetization and appointment of Adityanath Yogi as Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. In both the topics are in your book. Which one of the decision of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has hit India most in your view?
Demonetization. Yogi Adityanath can be voted out. The consequences of demonetization are being felt to this day, because actually, if you notice, the Prime Minister himself never talks about it. It was such a failure. There was the idea was to bring out black money. That did not happen. The unorganized economy, as they call it, was destroyed. So a lot of people had small businesses which no longer exist.
And it has destroyed the economy plus the GDP of the country.
Yes.
Are there any chances of recovery from this thing?
Well, I think that COVID has taught Modi a few lessons. One, that the lesson number one was that when he started showing off about how well we've dealt with COVID, he made a mistake, because he was speaking to an international audience and he didn't know what he was talking about. And when the second wave came, we discovered that hospitals didn't have beds or oxygen and that people were dying. We still don't have a really clear idea of how many people are dead. And India's credibility in the world has been very seriously damaged. So I think he's learned from that. And I hope he's learned. He seems humbler now than he was before that second wave.
Ma'am, last week you wrote a column, the last column you have on Indian Express. At the end of the column, you wrote, and I quote, "This columnist is counted among Modi's sharpest critics. But what he did last week has restored some of the faith that I once had in him." Has that faith, that love, I must say, been restored back?
No, it's not about love. But journalists don't love or hate politicians. Our business is to criticize policy by policy, event by event. That is how I have lived my life as a journalist. So my feelings for Sonia Gandhi or Rajiv Gandhi or Narendra Modi do not affect me. Have they done the right thing? Now, in taking back the farm laws, I believe he did the right thing. In that context, I said, I see a humbler face emerging now. And I think it is because of the mistakes that have been made in the past 2 years.
And you are very positive that this humble face, we can see it in other things also.
No, I don't have that faith. I continue to be very worried about the fact that he is very autocratic and very allergic to dissidents.
Before we wind up this discussion, I must ask you about Kashmir. Do you think Mr. Prime Minister has handled Kashmir well?
I actually have covered Kashmir, as you know, for a very long time. And I do not object to the removal of Article 370, because I saw that it had given the Kashmiris a false idea that there was a possibility of azadi. There never was, and there isn't going to be. It is not strategically possible for India to ever allow that. And especially now with what's happened in Afghanistan, there can be no little Islamic republic within India. And secondly, in Kashmir, azadi had become a totally different thing and had become, now you wanted the Shariat. So I think the removal of Article 370 had become necessary, but he handled very badly the way in which it was done. I believe that he could have taken on board many Kashmiri politicians with a lot of strength in the valley, and that would have been a better way to do it.
But then again, his arrogance and ego has come in the way in diluting this special status.
I think that this inability to listen, it's very, very important for a political leader in a democracy to listen. And Mr. Modi's inability to listen is harming him more than anybody else can.
Mr. Prime Minister should listen more and more and more.
He must start meeting journalists who disagree with him. He must start meeting political leaders who disagree with him, farm leaders who disagree with him. If he had listened to the farmers when they said, come here, talk to us, then we wouldn't have spent a year of chaos.
And he isn't listening to anyone as of now.
He started to listen, hasn't he? He started to listen to the farmers.
But what about then UP elections, the angle of UP elections in that?
In the UP elections, we have to yet see what is going to emerge as the main mudda, because actually we don't know whether it's possible to make it into a Hindu versus Muslim thing, because almost every constituency in UP has a very large Muslim population.
Let me end this show here. Thank you very much for talking to me. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Please subscribe to our channel Roportaj and press the bell icon to remain updated.